Greetings again, Lori George here, this time with a rather odd title. Who is the Matrix versus what is the Matrix? Let's get into it. We start with a look at history in the making at the time Jesus presented to do God's will, to fulfill and free God's people from the weight of Levitical law, a new thing being done on the earth. In the following scriptures, Jesus checks the temperature of the community members now in service as his disciples here in Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 16 and verse 20. When Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, "Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Then he commanded his disciples that they should tell no one that he was Jesus the Christ. And that's from the New King James Version. Again, Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 16 and verse 20. In verses 21 through 28 of the same chapter, Jesus goes on to explain what he must suffer and where, and afterward return to the disciples in kingdom power. I encourage those of you with a copy of the Bible to go ahead and refresh your memory. A personal copy of the Bible can be downloaded for free online on several different sites. Now, the title of this video is not made in poor grammar. You'll understand why I ask, who is the Matrix versus what? If you've already listened to my video, Not Hiding, message in response to Mo, you'll remember that numerous suitors have been a source of relentless anxiety since my entrance to this story in May of this year. And it's been a buzz now for many months on end. One particular suitor was especially troublesome, with no word, call, or mention of his expected arrival. I soon became incensed and rejected his intention to unite altogether. Yet, this waiting period resulted in a huge blessing, for during this time I was able to go deeper within to discover more thoroughly just who I am. Had I continued on with the latest suitor, the one dragging his feet, I'd surely have missed the most wonderful opportunity that only comes along once per iteration. What the heck does that mean, per iteration? It means once per experiment cycle, that's said without apology. You see, I learned early on during my study of psychology that life follows an eerily similar, if not prototypical, pattern of a well-planned research design, or vice versa. That's right. Let me pause while that soaks in. So what, or who I am, unfolded ever so prophetically, revealed through a natural sense of curiosity alone. I've always been curious, and I am bold enough to ask questions. Here's the scenario. I was fighting spiritually to determine which suitor to keep and which to cast aside. There were so many. All the while not even being in the market for a suitor to begin with, yet believing that this was part of what I'd signed up for. Then this straggler. So naturally for me, and out of exasperation, I asked God, "Where's your mate?" You remember that in the former video. Thinking to myself that if marriage is such a wonderful arrangement that we can't even get a meet and greet off the ground here, why wasn't God married? Then, as I said before, I can't really remember what happened next, except I did see a video displayed in my YouTube feed about God having a wife by a channel named Myth Vision Podcast. I viewed it and then consulted an old Bible study manual I was given by a sister from the Kingdom Hall while one of Jehovah's Witnesses decades ago. On page 144, the name Asherah directed me to see Sacred Pole, S-E-E, see Sacred Pole. That's all it said in the definition, see Sacred Pole. From there, page 1429, where the sacred pole was, contained its own heading dedicated to Asherah. Asherah, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, where it reads in part, the Rosh Shamra texts identify this goddess as the wife of the god El, the creator of creatures, and refer to her as Lady Asherah of the sea and progenitress of the gods, this also making her the mother of Baal. That's in the book titled Aid to Bible Understanding, published in 1971. I know this sounds very confusing. I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. What I gather from this is that Asherah evidently existed as a deity at some point, for her memory is a source of contention between the tribes of Israel, seen in reference to an indecent figure of her resulting in the removal of King Asa's mother from her occupation as Queen Mother in 2 Chronicles chapter 15, verses 1 through 8, verse 10, and verse 16. This situation of King Asa's mother sounds strikingly similar to current tarot readings, if you've been following them. There are divine ones right now who've been outed spiritually, and soon publicly, for attempting to swap identities with authentic divines and portraying them obscenely in the court of public opinion. I had to dig deeper. Both page 1428 and 1429 suggest that much confusion still exists around the topic of who Asherah is specifically. Yet several items within the wilderness tabernacle were made of acacia wood, and the lampstand is shaped like a tree of 6 branches, its fruit and blossoms like that of almond trees. If you enjoy research, these articles within the Wilderness Tabernacle mentioned previously can be found in Exodus chapter 25 verse 8 through chapter 27 verse 21. Why is this wood or tree or lampstand in the wilderness thing important? Where does all this fit in? It's important because it's intertwined with the frenzied situation of the Shulamite maiden in the Song of Solomon, who also tired of waiting for her love to arrive, who went on to bed. Her lover finally made it to her, but listen to what he says to his fellow partiers here in Song of Solomon, after finally knocking on her door in chapter 5, verse 1. I have come to my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. Then turns to his friends immediately afterward to say, Eat, O friends. Drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones. In verse 6, the maiden gets up to answer the door, but her beloved had turned away and was gone. Interesting. Stay with me. The Song of Solomon is a very cryptic, obviously encoded, and most indecipherable book of the Bible. But wait, the real message could easily be missed by being dismissed as a simple story of a suitor, as it is commonly. A suitor delayed due to too much partying and thereafter consumption of the maiden's fruit with his homies, while showing a lack of consideration for the maiden's time by arriving after dark. So what's the real message behind this tomfoolery? Clearly, the maiden is not a maiden, but instead a tree. For the maiden describes herself in chapter 1, verse 1 as dark but lovely, but states in verse 6 that because the sun has tanned her, her mother's sons were angry. Why didn't she just say brothers? Her brothers were angry. Secondly, in chapter 1, verse 7, the maiden says, Tell me, O whom I love, where you feed your flock, where you make it rest at noon. Why should I be as one who veils herself? Clearly talking about shade. Third, in chapter 1, verse 16, she says to her love, Also our bed is green, and our rafters of fur. Number 4, in chapter 3, verse 6 asks, Who is this coming out of the wilderness? In verse 7, it is Solomon's couch with 60 valiant men around it, of the valiant of Israel. Okay. Who is this coming out of the wilderness? It is Solomon's couch. Now that's poor grammar. That relates back to the title. Who is this coming out of the wilderness? It is Solomon's couch. Well, what is Solomon's couch made of? Wood. Okay. Point number 5. In chapter 5, verse 2, the maiden, I use air quotes, states, I sleep, but my heart is awake. Verse 5, I rose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh. Point 6, in chapter 5, verse 7 states, The watchmen who went about the city found me. They struck me, they wounded me. The keepers of the walls took my veil away from me. So they cut off the treetops, her veil, her shade. Point 7, chapter 7, verse 7 is said of her, This stature of yours is like a palm tree, in verse 8. I said, I will go up to the palm tree. I will take hold of its branches. Verse 8. By now, of course, like me, you're asking, what does this tree stuff, these tree references, have to do with a maiden? Point 8. Whose brothers say of her in chapter 8, verse 8, we have a little sister. In verse 9, if she is a wall, we will build upon her a battlement of silver. And if she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. Weird. Okay, point 9, to which the maiden responds in verse 10, I am a wall. Many people make reference to her being a virgin and keeping her virginity, which is why they explain that she's calling herself a wall. Okay, point 10. She responds to Solomon in verse 11, my own vineyard is before me. You, O Solomon, may have 1,000, and those who tend its fruit 200. 1,000 or 200? What? Copies of her? Or limbs and trunks? And finally, point 11. Chapter 3, verse 9 states, still in Song of Solomon, of the wood of Lebanon, Solomon the king made himself a palanquin. Webster's Ninth New Collegiate Dictionary defines this palanquin as a conveyance formerly used in Eastern Asia, especially for one that consists of an enclosed litter borne on the shoulders of men by means of poles. Stay with me, I know this is confusing. And that's from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, published in 1988. A litter, also from the same dictionary, because I had no idea what this litter thing was. A litter is an open, curtained couch carried by men, and that's on page 698 of that dictionary. Whoa, let's defrag all this. Okay. It appears then that the memory of Asherah was buried intentionally within ceremonial depictions on items and utensils, like Solomon's couch and the utensils in the tabernacle, within cryptic biblical references like the Song of Solomon, on referential temple images and items that were resurrected by kings intermittently, like bringing them out, only to once again be removed or eventually destroyed by their successor, and perhaps further dishonored or belittled through, wait for it, symbolic cultural practice known as bonsai, a work of tedious oriental occupation to retard the tree's growth, which was recognized in 1929 in Japan, per the same Merriam-Webster dictionary I just quoted from. Oddly enough, the Myth Vision podcast viewed on YouTube mentioned how God's having a wife seemed to be common knowledge up until 1929. Could that be a coincidence? You decide. Could bonsai be a type of spell work made effective through public, ritually practiced symbolism? And if so, what's the real message conveyed here? It doesn't seem so covert anymore, does it? Instead, it reeks of overt female energy oppression, suppression, and obsession. To what end, we might ask? Could this be why such fierce contention has been afoot within the contemporary cloaked Shulamite suitor? Finally, could it be that Asherah has made her way back from enforced suppression and used the delay wisely, only to discover that she was not the bride of Christ, but the wife of God Himself? That said, is this why both heaven and hell are being shaken? To cut her down and relegate her to a stump for yet another spin cycle? By God, I think not. Step aside, challengers to the throne. Mama's back. If you're still in doubt, you need to look up the definition of matrix. Toodles.